Margaret Wilson lived a quiet life in a small town in Oregon. At 59, she had grown used to the rhythm of her days. Morning coffee on the porch, tending to her roses, and evenings spent with old movies on the couch. Her life had become predictable, orderly, and safe. 8 years had passed since her husband Robert died. And although she had grieved deeply at first, over time she had accepted her solitude. Loneliness had become familiar, but she didn't mind it too much. It gave her time to herself, time to think, and time to keep her small house in perfect order. Friends had married off or moved away, and Margaret no longer expected surprises. In life, certainly nothing that would stir her heart in unexpected ways. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, the sky over Oregon was heavy with clouds, and the steady drumming of rain against the roof made her house feel even quieter than usual. Margaret had decided to order groceries online, preferring the convenience over venturing out into the storm. She made her list carefully, adding fruits, vegetables, and a few treats for herself. By the time the delivery window arrived, she had brewed a cup of tea and settled by the window, watching droplets slide down the glass. The sound of the rain was almost hypnotic, comforting, like a gentle lull that made the day slow down. The doorbell rang, cutting through the soft rhythm of the rain. Margaret rose slowly, adjusting the gray sweater she wore over her dress. She opened the door, expecting to see a familiar middle-aged delivery driver, someone she had seen around the neighborhood countless times before. Instead, standing on her porch, holding the grocery bags carefully, was a young man she had never seen. He looked to be in his mid-20s, tall with messy brown hair damp from the rain. His eyes were warm, and his polite smile caught her slightly off guard. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice friendly but calm. "Delivery for Margaret Wilson." Margaret blinked for a moment, almost forgetting to speak. "That's me," she said softly, her hand resting lightly on the doorframe. The young man, Nathan Carter, name tag replaced the bag just inside her doorway. He did not rush away as most delivery people did. Instead, he glanced around her living room with interest, eyes briefly resting on the neatly arranged furniture and the framed photographs on the walls. "Rain's getting worse out there," he said casually. "Good day to stay inside." Margaret nodded, slightly taken aback by his observation. "Yes, I suppose it is." For a moment, something shifted between them. It was subtle, not the kind of instant chemistry one sees in movies, but Margaret felt a flutter in her chest, a little spark of attention she had not felt in years. She realized she was looking at him more than she normally would at a delivery person. Noticing the careful way he carried the groceries and the slight hesitation in his stance that made him appear almost gentle, Ethan's gaze softened as he looked at the small bouquet of roses outside, the ones Margaret had tended for years. "Nice place you've got here," he said, nodding toward the garden. "The roses outside are beautiful." Margaret was surprised. Most people never noticed the roses despite the care she put into them every day. "Oh, thank you," she replied, her lips curving into a faint smile. "My husband planted them years ago." Ethan's expression changed slightly, a shadow of understanding crossing his face. "He had good taste," he said softly, his voice carrying a kind warmth that made Margaret's heart beat a little faster than she expected. She handed him a small tip, a reflex she could not shake, but he gently shook his head. "You already tipped through the app?" he said, his smile polite but firm. "You don't need to do that." Margaret insisted, placing the money in his hand anyway. "Well, consider it for braving the rain," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan chuckled, a light, pleasant sound. "All right, I won't argue with that." He began to turn toward the door, but paused as if remembering something. "Oh, by the way," he said, pointing toward the garden, "you ever need help with those roses? I'm pretty good with plants." Margaret raised an eyebrow, a mixture of amusement and curiosity crossing her face. "Is that part of the delivery service?" she asked. "No, just being neighborly," he replied with a grin. For some reason, Margaret laughed. It was soft at first, But it grew more genuine as she realized how unusual it felt to have someone talk to her like this kindly, without any rush, without expectation. The feeling was unexpected and new, almost electric in its subtlety. 4. The first time in years. Her house felt a little less quiet. That afternoon marked the beginning of something she had long thought was closed to her life. Over the following weeks, Ethan's deliveries became more frequent, and with each visit, their conversations grew longer. He spoke of small things: his love for music, how he had moved to the town recently, his admiration for gardening, and Margaret found herself sharing little stories about her past, about her husband, about life in general. The conversations were gentle, casual, and yet, behind the words, there was an undercurrent of something more. Margaret noticed it in the way he listened, genuinely, without judgment. It was not a romance that struck suddenly or dramatically. There were no grand gestures, no over-the-top compliments. Instead, it was subtle, a glance that lingered a little longer than necessary, a smile that seemed to carry more than just politeness, and a softness in his voice when he spoke to her. She realized that she had been lonely not because she wanted attention, but because she had stopped expecting it from anyone who truly cared. And yet, here was Ethan, a young man who, through small acts and words, reminded her that connection, attention, and even attraction could still exist. One evening, the rain had stopped. The sky was turning a muted orange from the setting. Son, Ethan delivered a small package of groceries, and this time, Margaret invited him inside briefly to set them down. He stepped into the warm living room, and Margaret felt an unfamiliar flutter in her stomach, feeling she hadn't felt since she was much younger, before grief had taken hold of her life. They spoke quietly about nothing and everything. There, conversation flowing effortlessly. Margaret caught herself smiling more than usual, enjoying the comfort of being listened to, of being seen, of feeling noticed. She realized how starved she had been for genuine companionship. Even if it was only for a few minutes each week, it was in these small moments that she started to question the limits she had placed on her heart. Could a young man, someone so different from her late husband, truly awaken emotions she thought she had buried? The question frightened her, yet also excited her. It had been a long time since she felt the gentle pull of curiosity toward another person, the quiet thrill of wondering what might come next. Margaret noticed that her thoughts began to linger on Ethan even after he left. She found herself looking forward to his deliveries, imagining the sound of his voice, the brief warmth of his smile, the light he seemed to bring into her ordinary days. The loneliness that had once felt like a companion now began to feel heavier when he was not around. She realized she was longing for more than just conversation. She was longing for connection, for a sense of being truly noticed and appreciated again. Yet, alongside the excitement, there was hesitation. Margaret was aware of the difference. In their ages, aware of her own fears and insecurities, she wondered if what she felt was real or just the echo of a lonely heart desperate for attention. The thought both excited and unsettled her. Could she allow herself to feel something she hadn't dared to feel in years? Could she open herself to someone who might bring new light into her life, even if it meant stepping into uncharted territory? That evening, after Ethan had left, Margaret sat by the window looking at the roses that glowed softly in the fading light. She realized something important. Her heart, despite years of grief and solitude, was not as old as she had believed. It could still respond, still feel, still desire warmth and connection. And that realization both scared her and thrilled her at the same time. Little did Margaret know that the spark that Ethan had unknowingly lit on that rainy afternoon was just the beginning. In the weeks to come, their relationship would grow in ways she could not have imagined. Conversations would deepen, trust would build, and feelings would become impossible to ignore. And one evening during an ordinary delivery, Ethan would say something that would completely change the way she saw herself and the possibilities of love and companionship in her life. The ordinary knock of a delivery on a rainy day had set, In motion, a chain of events that would make Margaret question everything she believed about her life after 50. She had thought that romance and excitement were behind her, that her days of being noticed, admired, or desired were over. But the gentle presence of a young, kind, and attentive man had begun to awaken feelings that she had long thought were lost. And as she reflected on the day, the simple delivery, and the warmth she felt in that brief interaction, Margaret understood one thing. Life could still surprise her, even now. And that was just the beginning. Margaret had not expected her heart to race that evening. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, leaving a soft orange glow across the small town. She sat in her living room, tidying a few things, when the doorbell rang again. It was Ethan, as usual with another delivery. But there was something in his demeanor tonight that felt different, less casual, more deliberate. He smiled as he handed her the bag, but his eyes lingered a moment longer than before. Margaret felt her chest tighten with a strange combination of anticipation and nervousness. "Hi, Margaret," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "Got your groceries? How's your day been?" "Oh, fine," she replied, trying to keep her voice normal. But inside, she was aware of every small detail, how his hair fell slightly over his forehead, how his smile seemed warmer tonight than usual. Ethan glanced toward the living room, noticing the old photographs of Margaret and her late husband. "I have a lot of memories here," he said softly. "I can see why this place feels special to you." Margaret's eyes softened. She had told few people about Robert and their life together. But with Ethan, she felt an odd sense of ease. It was as if he could understand without her having to explain. "It does," she said quietly. "Every corner holds a story." There was a pause, comfortable but charged. Margaret felt a small flutter in her stomach. She realized she had not felt this way in decades. This quiet, nervous excitement, the sense that something significant was about to happen. "Do you want to sit for a minute?" she asked impulsively. "I mean, just for a chat. I have some time before dinner." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he smiled warmly. "I'd like that," he said, stepping inside. Margaret led him to the living room where the faint scent of roses lingered. They sat across from each other, a small coffee table between them, their hands occasionally brushing as they moved. The grocery bags aside, at first, the conversation was light about the weather, her garden, and local happenings. But gradually, it deepened. Ethan told her about his childhood in a neighboring city, about dreams he had set aside and the challenges of moving to a new town. Margaret found herself sharing her own story through the early years with Robert. The life she had built, the loneliness she had grown accustomed to. She spoke quietly, with honesty, and Ethan listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've built a beautiful life," he said finally, his voice soft. "Even after so many years, it's clear you've put your heart into everything you care about." Margaret felt a lump in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that, acknowledging her life, her effort, without judgment, without pity. There was respect in his words, but also warmth. It made her feel noticed, truly seen, in a way she had not expected. For a long moment, they were quiet, just looking at each other. Margaret felt her pulse quicken. She realized that the spark she had felt weeks ago during the first rainy delivery had grown into something more, something she could no longer ignore. It was a gentle pull, a magnetic attraction that made her aware of every detail. His voice, his smile, the way his eyes seemed to search for her thoughts. Ethan shifted slightly, leaning forward. "Margaret, I don't usually do this, but I feel like I should tell you something." Her heart skipped a beat. She felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I enjoy coming here," he said slowly. "Not just for the deliveries, but to see you, to talk to you. You make this town feel brighter, and I like spending time with you. Margaret's breath caught. She had not expected this confession. It was gentle, sincere, and yet it carried a weight that made her heart ache with longing. She had thought that the days of being admired, of having someone care so deeply about her presence, were long gone. And now, here it was, expected, tender, and thrilling. I feel the same, she admitted softly, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. I didn't expect it, but I look forward to seeing you too. Ethan smiled, relief and warmth spreading across his face. The air between them felt charged, yet calm, a quiet intensity that was more profound than any words. They continued to talk, their conversation drifting naturally from memories to hopes, dreams, and unspoken emotions. Margaret realized that she had not laughed this freely in years. She had not felt so alive. Over the next few weeks, their meetings became a quiet routine. Ethan would deliver groceries, and sometimes she would invite him in. They shared tea, discussed books, music, and the stories behind the photographs in her living room. Each encounter left her feeling lighter, more connected, more awake. She noticed herself preparing for his visit, adjusting little things in her home, choosing a slightly brighter sweater, arranging the flowers in the vase. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it brought her joy. Ethan, too, seemed to be affected. He would linger a little longer at the door, asking about her garden, her day, or sharing small jokes that made her laugh. He was attentive without being overbearing, kind without being cloying. Margaret began to sense a gentle, mutual affection, building a bond formed not just out of loneliness or kindness, but from a true emotional connection. One rainy evening, similar to the one when they first met, Ethan came with a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked on his way. Margaret was taken aback. "These are beautiful," she said, touched by the gesture. "I saw them and thought of you," he said simply. "Your roses reminded me of how much you care for things that matter." Margaret felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had not received a gift like this in years, certainly not from someone who truly understood her, was thoughtful, personal, and unassuming. And yet, it carried a quiet intimacy that made her heart race. Days turned into weeks, and the connection between them deepened. Margaret found herself thinking about Ethan even when he was not there. She imagined his smile, the sound of his voice, the gentle way he listened. She realized that her feelings were growing stronger than she had anticipated. It was not just fondness or appreciation, it was something that reminded her of youth, of excitement, of the possibility of being desired and cherished again. Yet, with the joy came hesitation. Margaret knew the difference in their ages, the whispers of propriety that society might raise, and the careful boundaries she had always maintained. But the warmth she felt in Ethan's presence, the understanding in his eyes, and the way he treated her with kindness and respect made her question her own doubts. Could she allow herself to feel something she had long denied? Could she accept the gentle stirrings of love and companionship in a life she had thought was settled? One evening, after sharing tea and conversation, Ethan reached across the table and lightly touched her hand. The gesture was simple, innocent, yet it sent a jolt of electricity through her. Margaret looked at him, seeing sincerity and warmth in his eyes. She realized then that this connection, this mutual affection, was real. It was not fleeting or shallow, it was rooted in care, respect, and genuine interest in each other's lives. "Margaret," Ethan said softly, "I know this might sound sudden, but I feel something for you. Something more than friendship. I don't want to rush anything, but I had to be honest about it." Margaret's heart pounded. She had never expected such words, and yet she felt a swell of happiness and relief. Had been waiting for someone to see her, truly see her, not just her age or her past, but the woman she still was inside. And here he was, a young man with a kind heart, acknowledging her worth, her presence, her life. I feel the same," she whispered, her eyes shining. "I didn't think. I thought. maybe it was just me being lonely. But no, I feel it too. Ethan smiled a slow, genuine smile that made her feel like the center of the universe. They sat in silence for a moment, hands still touching, hearts quietly sinking. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving a calm stillness that mirrored the peace and excitement stirring within Margaret. Over the next few weeks, their relationship grew, not in dramatic gestures or public displays, but in quiet, meaningful ways. Walks in the garden, shared tea, laughter, and deep conversations became their rhythm. Margaret began to feel alive in a way she had not in years. The quiet thrill of connection, intimacy, and gentle romance enriching her days. Ethan treated her with respect, admiration, and care. He never rushed, never pressured, and always listened. Margaret, in turn, found herself opening up, sharing parts of her heart that had long been locked away. She realized that love in its quiet, gentle form could exist at any age, in unexpected ways. And that connection was more about emotional intimacy than youth or appearance. One afternoon, as Margaret tended her roses, Ethan helped her with pruning and watering. They laughed over small mistakes, shared stories about life and dreams, and lingered together in a way that felt completely natural. As she looked at him kneeling in the garden, she realized that the spark she had felt the first rainy day had grown into a steady flame, one that promised warmth, companionship, and the possibility of love that was tender, sincere, and profoundly human. Margaret knew the journey ahead would have its questions, its uncertainties, and perhaps moments of hesitation. But for the first time in years, she embraced the idea that her heart could be touched, her life could be brightened, and that joy, intimacy, and connection were still possible.